Nous reprenons la séance.
We are resuming our meeting. Welcome to meeting 53 of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs. We will be holding a hybrid meeting today. Some of the MPs are attending via Zoom.
Adopted on Monday, October 3rd, 2022. The committee is resuming its study on the experience of women's veterans. Je vous rappelle que toutes les
I would remind you that all comments should be addressed through the chair and in keeping with our routine motion on sound testing. I would like to inform the members that all members have been tested, except, or rather all the witnesses have been tested, and except for those who are yet to join. I would also like to mention that we should give a trigger warning. We are maybe discussing experiences related to general health and mental health. This may be triggering to viewers, members, or staff with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or you need help, please advise the clerk.
From our witnesses, I would like to provide this trigger warning. We may be discussing experiences related to general health and mental health. This may be triggering to viewers, members of staff with similar experiences. If you feel distressed or need help, please advise the clerk. Et avant d'accueillir nos témoins,
Before hearing from our witnesses, I want to welcome those who will be taking part. We have online MP Patricia Latanzia, who is replacing MP Daryl Sampson, Randall Garrison, who is replacing Ms. Rachel Blaney, MP, and MP Stephen Ellis, who is also replacing today. I would also note that we have Neman Shugu, who is helping our usual clerk, Mr. Vasiliev. So we have witnesses with us, and we are pleased.
Dr. Alison Hanson, clinical psychologist, supervised practice, and Alana Jackmet, registered social worker and registered psychotherapist. And on the web, on Zoom, we have Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian Veterans, Dr. Ramesh Zacharias, Chief Executive Officer, Hélène Lesler, Capitaine Retired, Co-Chair, Centre of Excellence Advisor Council for Veterans, and also by video conference, and Dr. Joy McDermott, Professor, by video conference. So we're going to start with Mrs. Hanson for 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours. Please go ahead.
We are actually going to be sharing our time today. So
Great. Okay.
So I'll be starting then.
Go ahead.
Chair, Vice Chair, committee members, fellow speakers, thank you for this opportunity to participate in this important conversation regarding the experiences of women veterans. We're happy that this committee has recognized the importance of including clinicians in the conversation regarding women veterans' experiences. My colleague and I have collectively spent 30 years working with veterans, CAF members, and their families. As clinicians, we are often the knowledge brokers trained to hold veterans' experiences without any agenda beyond healing, yet our collective voices are rarely heard. We were invited here following a call for concern from a group of clinicians regarding the new LifeMark PCVRS contract with Veterans Affairs for the rehab program. Our key apprehensions are the program's lack of focus on cultural competency or trauma. Number two, the need for more transparency between VAC, PCVRS, and the clinical service providers. And three, that the depreciation of the clinical expertise of the current service providers will have a negative implication for the veterans' treatment. We will reserve the conversation regarding the lack of transparency in VAC programming and concerns about devaluing current service providers' expertise for future meetings. Today, we will focus on the importance of cultural competency in women veterans rehabilitation programming, and we will close by providing recommendations to the committee. Since our initial communication with PCVRS, we have had multiple meetings with various stakeholders and attempted to educate ourselves in all aspects of the program. The PCVRS program needs more detailed requirements for training backgrounds for those hired. We feel clinicians hired for the new program must understand PTSD and complex PTSD, the sexual misconduct lawsuit, and institutional trauma experienced by many women veterans. We have provided definitions of these concerns in the endnotes of our statement. Many women we work with release not because of deployment-related trauma, but after experiencing sustained systemic trauma, feeling silenced or forced to soldier on despite moral and physical injuries. Or they feel voluntarily released because they feel the slow release process increases the risk for suicidal ideation or attempts, creating trauma for their families, or sense that they could no longer survive the process. We want to quote a veteran who shared her experiences with us.
I endured multiple traumatizing situations while I was deployed to Afghanistan. To this day, most of my comrades know that I was released for mental health reasons, and most probably assume it's combat-related, which isn't true. It's 100% mental health issues stemming from prolonged military sexual misconduct. I could no longer be strong. So many years of unacknowledged trauma came flooding to the surface. I tried for almost 7 years to get back to how I functioned before, where I could suppress everything and soldier on. That led to years of depression, suicidal ideation, and multiple suicide attempts. No amount of therapy helped, and I eventually ended up with a medical release, which I didn't have the strength to fight anymore. Currently, PCVRS has mandatory trainings, none of which speak to the unique experiences of women veterans, and we believe this is a glaring error that they should rectify. Although understanding women veterans' experiences can be learned over time, PCVRS's failure to prioritize women puts them at risk for sanctuary trauma. Women veterans often report coming forward with their concerns, only to be met by non-culturally competent clinicians. We recognize that the new PCVRS rehab program is vocationally focused, not trauma-focused. Still, we do not want to risk re-traumatizing women in a system that is supposed to focus on healing and new beginnings. By recruiting clinicians that are not culturally competent and do not understand the complexities of CAF releases, a clinician is unable to treat women veterans holistically. We would like to bring this call to all culturally competent clinicians from the spectrum of women and those in the Canadian military colleges, CAF members, and veterans. We now present our 5 key recommendations. We must engage women veterans, clinicians, case managers, and other stakeholders when developing and modifying programs for women using community-based participatory research methods. These methods will promote women veterans' knowledge mobilization in hopes of reducing gender blindness and honoring women's needs and experiences. All clinicians should be required to have 2 to 3 trauma-focused modalities, trainings in 2 to 3 trauma-focused modalities, and 3 years of experience with CAF or veterans. They should be required to participate in training focused on women's veteran experiences, information regarding the LGBTQ+ community, and the sexual misconduct lawsuits. Clinicians should use progress monitoring measures to evaluate clinician-client relationships such as the PCOMs. There should be more shared resources and transparency in research with women, veterans, and CAF, and education and resource packages on VAC programs should be provided to clinicians. Finally, We are recommending that CAF allows students of psychology and other accredited programs identified under the Psychotherapy Act to have the opportunity to participate in internships on the Canadian Armed Forces bases. This would provide excellent training opportunities for trauma-informed and culturally competent care, increase resources on base, and help develop clinicians who can provide quality care to veterans and civilians upon graduation. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. So before going to our next witnesses, we're going to take a really short break because we have to make sure that the sound of our witnesses is okay for our interpreters. So stay tuned. Je suspends la séance.
I suspend the meeting.
Nous reprenons la séance.
We will resume our meeting now.
Two witnesses on Zoom. We have Dr. Ramesh Zacharias, Chief Executive Officer, and Dr. Joy McDermott, Professor. They are by video conference. So let's go to you. I don't know which one would like to do the opening remark. Previously, it was supposed to be Mr. Zacharias or Madame Lessler. You have 5 minutes for your opening remark. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for the privilege to present to your committee today. My name is Dr. Ramesh Zacharias. I'm the President, CEO, and Medical Director of the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian Veterans. We are an independent, not-for-profit organization established on April 1st, 2020. We are funded by Veterans Affairs Canada to study the effects of chronic pain in Canadian veterans and focus on improving pain management and overall well-being of Canadian veterans and their families. Chronic pain affects 20% of the general population of Canadians. that number increases to 40% of veterans, and sadly, it affects 50% of female veterans. In addition, 60% of veterans suffering from chronic pain also suffer from mental health issues, and 63% of veterans suffering from mental health issues also suffer from chronic pain. In the last 3 years, the CPCOA has funded 43 research projects involving 24 institutions across Canada, including 7 postgraduate research projects with master's and PhD candidates. One candidate is our next presenter, Hélène Lecelleur, a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces. She will share her remarkable story shortly. My clinical practice involves 60 to 70% are veterans at the Michael G. DeGroote Pain Clinic at Hamilton Health Sciences. The statistics I've presented are reflected in the population of patients I treat every day. It is critical that both pain and mental health issues be treated concurrently to achieve any relief from those debilitating chronic conditions. Our clinic has the best success in treating veterans with an interdisciplinary team using a biopsychosocial model of care. I will now have the Vice Chair of the CPCOA's Advisory Council of Veterans, Hélène Lecelleur, share her amazing story of resilience.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all members of the committee for inviting me to testify on this important study for women veterans. I joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 1990 at the age of 17, as one of the first women to join the combat arm in an effort to increase the numbers of women in service. Needless to say, our presence in the infantry was not welcome. As soon as I joined the forces, I had to work harder than any man just to be treated as their equal. In this very homogeneous male world, I shed my femininity to make room for the identity of being a soldier and gain respect. I would like to mention that at the time, the harassment guidelines were not yet very developed, which kept the environment very toxic for us women. From the beginning and throughout my career of 26 years, I've been subjected to misconduct by men. At the beginning, to make me give up, but later on, to appropriate my body. From verbal harassment to touching, to forced kissing by superior, and also to the invasion of my private life as a way to force me to accept the unacceptable. But I consider myself lucky, as I'm not one of those who have been raped. This introduction is important because it represents the often forgotten reality of women veterans. This is in addition to other suffering that may be more predominant, such as psychological or physical injuries. For my part, I live with both. I developed post-traumatic stress disorder following my mission in Afghanistan, and I believe that my chronic pain was directly linked to it. However, I realized that I've been abusing my body for a long time to perform and maintain hard-earned position. For example, when I joined the forces, I had to accept boots that were too big for me and equipment that was inadequate for my size, to overtrain despite injuries, and to hide my physical pain so as not to be judged or rejected by my team. And all this because we had to succeed in the mission. We had a duty to push through the pain. That being said, having integrated that suffering must be done in silence in order to perform, it becomes a huge barrier to seeking help. I am one of the many women who have learned to keep the hurt, abuse, and our own suffering quiet in order to gain respect as a military member. But what happened when our career is forced to an end that we did not choose, and our wounds, whether physical or psychological, becomes a symbol of an end? I believe it is important to consider that this transition to civilian life is not without its challenges for women veterans. Because in addition to coming out, they must also face justification that they are also wounded veterans and they deserve respect. It also becomes crucial to realize that it is possible to address chronic pain without exploring the underlying suffering of her career as a woman in the forces. Once again, Mr. Chairman and member of this committee, I am extremely grateful for this opportunity to testify before you. I sincerely believe that it is important to consider that the needs of female veterans differs from those of men, and that the response to chronic pain must be adapted, aligning that of psychological pain. I will now turn the floor over to Dr. Joy McDermott.
Thank you. I will echo the thoughts of thanks for sharing the work. I'm actually one of the researchers funded by the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence to investigate issues in chronic pain. And I focused on understanding the impact of sexual harassment using a confidential survey where we recently surveyed 300 Canadian veterans. What we found is that the odds of a woman veteran experiencing sexual harassment during her military service was more than 20 to 1 compared to the male colleagues. And women were also double the risk of verbal abuse. Our research and others shows, and the lived experience you've just heard from the female veterans reports that women who come forward are often either dismissed or even punished for reporting these problems. So many stay silent, unlike the people we've heard from today. Our research was unique in that we also measured psychological distress and the severity of chronic pain. And what our study illustrated is that there's a pathway between sexual harassment and psychological distress, and that there's a pathway between psychological distress and having persistent, severe, chronic pain. This data supports what you've just heard from the experiences of veterans, that sexual harassment and abuse result in not only long-standing psychological problems, but also long-standing physical pain as well. So we cannot solve chronic pain without managing the underlying causes. Therefore, we confirm that there is a need for protection for those who report discrimination, systematic changes to culture and training, and specialized interventions for people experiencing chronic pain that's been aggravated or caused by discrimination. I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And thank you for opening remarks also. Et j'en profite aussi pour...
I also want to take this opportunity to thank you for your service to our witness that you talked to us about. We will now go to a first round of questions, 6 minutes for our committee members.
Mrs. Cathy Morgenthau for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I do thank you all for being here tonight and sharing your life experiences and your concerns. I hope that we can learn a great deal from you. Ms. Le Chaleur, thank you. I've read your stories and what you've shared in the media. There was a Globe and Mail article where you say, and so just as she was working on a hypothesis that the military exacerbates mental illness and suicidal thoughts by cutting soldiers off from their social support system, so just as you were working on that, it says she turned in her ID card and was escorted to the door of National Defense Headquarters. I started to cry, she said. It was hard to believe that's how it ends. Were your superiors aware of what you were working on?
No, at the time I was still doing my master's, and it's afterwards when I was transitioning totally out of the military, 6 months after that I decided to pursue my work to the PhD level.
Okay, thank you. So you turned in your ID card. You know, we don't know what that's all about. Did you suddenly get told, come here, drop it here, goodbye? Like, how does that happen?
Thank you for the question. I hope that today it's different. I released in 2016. But back then, when you were doing your last day as a military personnel, You were entering the building at the 101 Colonel Ball Drive in Ottawa as a military person, so as a trusted person. The minute you were going up the stairs and meeting the last person with your piece of paper saying that you did quit, your quittance to every department, the civilian person who took my card, which is the ID section, just said to me, well, from now, you have to be escorted. So you feel like you're no longer trusted. You're no longer part of anything. It's like you're a prisoner or something that you cannot be left alone in the building that 5 minutes earlier I was trusted to be in, and my level, my clearance level was top secret, and in a minute I had to be escorted out from this building. So that was awful.
Okay, I understand what you're saying now. Thank you. It's hard to discern from this exactly what you're saying here, so thank you. And so you had a desire then to work on finding ways to improve that transition so that it wouldn't be so stark and whatnot. Go ahead.
Thank you again for the question, because it was mentioned in the opening remarks from the person before us. When you leave the military, it's. Can you repeat the question again? I lost my thought.
I guess I was still basically making a comment about the fact that you want to see things improve, and I think that they are. If you want to just explain a little bit how that encouraged you to go the direction you wanted to go.
We talked about that before. The vocational part of the transition is really well addressed. So as a portion of the health services also. But for me, the psychosocial portion of it, the identity portion was not addressed. I feel like when I left the military, I've been built as a soldier, but nobody helped me to become something different than the soldier I was. And that was the identity crisis that I faced. And I decided to study on that and do my research based on that.
Okay, so just a quick consideration of that. So what you say you were built into a soldier. Does that require removal of that civilian sense of values to become that soldier, and then not have the opportunity to see yourself kind of made whole again as a civilian?
Thank you for the question. I joined, I was 17. I was not even an adult.
Okay.
And the Army became my parent. The Army became the family I needed, with the structure, with all the guidance. And when I got kicked out at 43 years old, I got kicked out without anything, nobody telling me, where to go, how to behave. I was still waiting for my mission.
Can I just ask you, you're saying kicked out. That was kind of where I was heading with that first comment, but you indicated that you had to go through all those procedures to leave the building. When you say kicked out, you mean that basically you were no longer qualified to serve because of health issues, so it was a medical release? Is that what you're saying?
It was a medical release.
Okay.
And at that time in 2016, the fact that you received a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress syndrome was automatically meaning that you were being released for medical reason. No way of being accommodated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Morgenthal. And now for 6 minutes, I would like to invite Mr. Wilson Miao, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses appearing today for our important study for women veterans, and thank you for the service you've provided to all the veterans and our countries. First, I'd like to, through the chair, direct my first question to Chronic Pain Center of Excellence. With more than 40% of Canadian veterans suffering from chronic pain, the Center focuses on pain management research and evidence-based therapy that address veterans' complex chronic pain challenges and needs. Are there any recommendation after Dr. McDermott, your remark? Are there any recommendation that you would suggest or provide it to our committee to be included in our study report?
Joy, you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'll go ahead. I mean, the one study that we are just reported on has implications for us. So we know that it confirms what we believed, that there's a link between psychological distress caused from sexual discrimination and the experience of chronic pain. But it also means when people, so the first recommendation is that people, of course, have to be able to come forward without concerns about retribution and to be safe. And then when they come forward, they have to know that they're going to get treatment, not just for their not just for the psychological distress, but also for the physical pain that is often going to be accompanied with that. And we can't treat all cases of chronic pain the same, and we can't treat them like they're coming just from a physical injury. Chronic pain can also come from sexual assault, sexual discrimination, chronic stress from these kinds of traumatic psychological exposures that women veterans are exposed to. And they're going to need special treatment programs that help them deal with the psychological trauma as well as the physical pain in an integrated way. So I think that really confirms that the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence needs to put forward and test new treatment approaches that incorporate a specialized approach that takes into consideration the unique nature of chronic pain when it's associated with sexual harassment and assault problems and psychological distress that arise from them. And Dr. Ramesh is the expert in chronic pain management, seeing many of these patients, and I'm hoping that he will also confirm what I've just said to you.
Thank you, Joy, and thank you for your question, because as I mentioned at the opening remarks, about 60 to 70% of the people I treat today are veterans. About 25% of them are female, the remainder are male. In fact, just today I saw 4 veterans that are in our program that I treat. And you cannot separate the two. 60%, as I mentioned, of veterans with chronic pain also have mental health issues, and 63% with mental health issues. It's really two sides of the same coin. So if you're just going to give them a physiotherapy clinic or treat the musculoskeletal issues, you will not get the success. In fact, the research goes back to 2012, where the International Association of Study of Pain looked at 43 countries around the world. And their conclusion was the best model is a biopsychosocial model with physicians, with pharmacists, with psychologists, with psychiatrists, with addiction experts in one facility. I feel very blessed working at the DeGroote, where we have 12 different health professionals, including addiction experts, psychiatrists, psychologists, psychometrists. So when a veteran comes into our program, they get all the resources in one place. And that's probably why our success that has been published in peer-reviewed journals is we have the best success. And interestingly enough, veterans do better than civilians in our program, partly because of what Hélène said. They're mission first. They're very committed. They're dedicated to things that would help them. And even the 4 veterans I saw today, that was their remark. You tell me what to do, and I will do it. And by the way, I am feeling better. So just treating the physical aspects without addressing the psychological issues, you will not succeed. And that's been our mantra for 3 years with Veterans Affairs Canada. You must send people to interdisciplinary care as opposed to multidisciplinary care, where they see different specialists in different locations without a holistic one-center approach. And that's been part of our recommendation. Sorry, my apologies. Go ahead.
No problem, and thank you for sharing that with us. And I know in your opening remark you mentioned it's being funded by our government and started in April 2020. Since then until now, can you give us a sense of how many female veterans you have served in those 20% that you just mentioned? And what is the success rate? How long does it take to the pathway to recovery? And if you can give us an insight on that, please.
So the center itself does not provide care. The center is a research center. We fund researchers like Dr. McDermott. We fund master's and PhD students like Hélène and others who are involved. I have a clinical practice apart from the CPCOE. The CPCOE is a research center. It is not a treatment center. I can give you a response on the basis of my clinical practice at Hamilton Health Sciences, but the CPCOE is not involved in treating veterans.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Miao. Et maintenant, nous allons...
We will now go to the second vice chair of the committee for the next 6 minutes, Mr. Luc Désilets. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses tonight. I would like to start with a comment and provide some context because our study is called Experiences of Women Veterans. We discussed the French term last week. I would like to thank our analysts and our clerk for supporting consideration of the request made by Sandra Thérien, who appeared before the committee. And we have had a number of other requests by email that have come from my writing. And certainly this request is something that we should treat seriously. I think we should use vétéran in French to make the distinction. I would like to thank you on behalf of the team. The department has now decided to adopt that term in French, and we will therefore use it ourselves. When we say veterans, it's a generic term that doesn't necessarily indicate women. So there will be two different words in French. You still have all of your time left. Thank you very much. We'll restart the clock. So that shows that what this committee does can have an impact, a significant impact. Thank you very much. My first question is for Mr. Zacharias. I understand that your organization started in 2020, Dr. Zacharias. What isn't clear to me is who it started. Did it come from the Ontario government, the federal government, or was it a group of individuals that began this?
For question.
Thank you for your question.
Answer it in English so that you'll actually understand what I say. This center was funded by Veterans Affairs Canada, and we have two stakeholders, one of which is McMaster University. The second stakeholder is the Hamilton Health Science Corporation. We're located in McMaster, and all our funding comes from Veterans Affairs Canada through a contribution agreement. Initially was 3 years, and as of April, we have now signed a 5-year extension.
Qu'on peut savoir.
Okay. What about the operating budget?
Included within the funding we get, between 65 and 70% of the funds go towards research, and around 30% goes to overhead. But the majority of the funds are used, as I said, we have in the 3 years funded almost 43 research projects involving 25 universities and 7 scholarships, of which Hélène Lasseleur is one that we've funded for the last 2 years as she has done her PhD.
Parfait, merci.
Thank you. You talked about the 21 research projects currently underway, but none of them is located in a Quebec or a Francophone university. Is that correct?
Toujours pour M. Zacharias.
My question is still for Dr. Zacharias.
Yeah. In fact, last month we signed a contribution agreement with QPRN, which is the Quebec Pain Research Network. We have scholarships of students who are in Quebec at Sherbrooke as well as Laval. So our scientific director of partnerships is actually Professor Luc Hébert, who is a 28-year veteran based out of the University of Laval. So we have significant presence within the province of Quebec. And in fact, we have universities coast to coast that we have funded, and students in New Brunswick, in Quebec, in Manitoba. We're a national contract, and we try to make sure that there's representation across the country.
Excellent, je suis très heureux.
Thank you. That's excellent. I'm very glad to hear it. I did not know that, because certainly Quebec researchers would like to have that information and be able to share it among Francophone veterans. Very relevant. So was that just this year? Was it the first year for that?
No, in the very first year, we had scholarships for students in Quebec as well. What we have done more recently is develop a relationship with QPRN, which is a large network, which is easier than just finding individual researchers in Quebec. So our agreement is with the University of Sherbrooke, where Dr. Hélène Baudry, who's the head of QPRN, the contract is with them. But we've been working with the Sainte Anne Hospital in Montreal as well as McGill over the last 3 years. But we formalized our relationship with QPRN this past year.
Une toute petite question, peut-être en...
Just a brief question, because in the headlines in Quebec over the past little while, it was indicated that French in the sciences has lost a lot of ground, and that more support is needed. So do you see that happening in your organization, less work in French?
Did you say more work in French or less work in French?
Non, qu'il y a moins...
That there's less research that is that has grants when it comes from centers that are Francophone. So do you find that there is less research money going to Francophone universities?
I cannot comment on that. I can only comment on what we have done and what we are doing. Probably the best developed research network is QPRN in Quebec. They're formal structure. They have a good connectivity between them. And that's the reason why we established that relationship with them. And Dr. Luc Hébert, who's our Director of Strategic Partnerships, is the one who's been driving a greater presence for us in Quebec.
Okay. Je voyais Madame...
Okay. Ms. Le Celler, I think, wanted to say something on this. Thank you. We had the first formal meeting as a consortium to discuss research for Francophone veterans today. This is a priority that I have as a vice chair. It is certainly something that I brought by joining the team. We want to represent francophones and French-speaking researchers. Today I had a meeting about this. We want to serve Quebec veterans. What Dr. Zacharias said, I would support. We have this new network that we are working with, the new consortium that will work with Francophone researchers as partners. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. Now we go for 6 minutes.
Randall Garrison, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm particularly pleased to be here this evening as I represent what's probably the second largest military riding in the country, including CFP Esquimalt on the West Coast. And I have a large number of both serving Canadian Forces members and large numbers of veterans in my riding. And we do a lot of casework with both serving members and those who are veterans. And I think the most frequent heard difficulty in my office has been the difficulty in convincing either Veterans Affairs or D&D that there is a connection between mental health challenges and physical manifestations. There's a presumption that those two have nothing to do with each other that seems to inform the programming of both organizations. And so I'm going to ask my question first to the Chronic Pain Center. You've been running for about 3 years. Do you have the research to help support those serving members and veterans in making that case that the program has to acknowledge that link? Whoever is the appropriate one from the center.
Joy, do you want to go ahead?
I'll start. I think that's one of the interesting things in our study. We used a complicated statistical modeling to show what are the pathways between different things. And we showed that there was a pathway from experiencing sexual discrimination or assault and distress. And then there was a pathway between experiencing psychological distress and having severe chronic pain. So that means that people who had those experiences, there was a linkage that one thing led to the next thing that led to the next thing. So it really told us that there's psychological impact and the physical impact. We can't separate that. And we see this so often with especially chronic musculoskeletal pain. Often people who present with chronic musculoskeletal pain are underneath that, it's like an onion skin. There's psychological injuries that occurred that led to that. And sometimes because of the stigma around mental health, it's easier for people to present with chronic pain than to reflect the chronic psychological distress and injuries that they've had. And so if you don't acknowledge these problems, they manifest as chronic pain, and people maybe talk about their physical symptoms more than they talk about their mental health symptoms because of chronic pain. But if you treat one and ignore the other, you don't get anywhere. And it's a very Western philosophy to separate physical health and mental health, but we know that's not really good in any aspect of health. They really are integrated everywhere, but perhaps nowhere is this more important than with veterans.
That's the same question to Ms. Jacquemet or Ms. Hansen. In your clinical practice, do you see this problem for people in establishing that link in order to get proper treatment?
Yeah, I definitely, for the veterans that I treat, there's always a connection between the two, and you know, we know PTSD lives in the body, and they're often, you know, seeking many different ways of managing not just the chronic pain, but there's other psychosocial things happening. And so, you know, I appreciate the comment earlier about having, I don't think it was called the wraparound service, but having services together in one place. And I think that's a real a valuable thing that could be improved on, is having some more of those wraparound services where veterans don't have to go from place to place and manage and coordinate on their own, having a more coordinated approach, I think would be a fantastic improvement.
Thank you. The second thing we see quite often in our office is a difficulty particularly for veterans, but also for serving members in connecting their symptoms to their service. And so the presumption that they must have done something somewhere else couldn't possibly have been their service or their status as a veteran that caused these things. And so a tendency to point people elsewhere and say, not our fault. And I wonder if that's reflected in the experience you've had.
I definitely believe so. I find it takes a long time when people first present in our office, when veterans first present. It's the level of stress is so high that the services that we do a lot in the initial stages have to create that regulation in order to decrease some of the nervous system's response to actually start putting together those pieces. And so we, are able to borrow from a large body of literature on how trauma lives in the body, like my colleague indicated, and that these processes take time and that we need to be very supportive in helping them build that narrative, because without it, it's like parceling someone out into many pieces.
Okay, quickly, with 1 minute, I want to go back to the Center for Pain Research, Chronic Pain, and ask that same kind of question. Do you have research that then helps to support the linkages between the problems that people face and their service?
We do. I think probably the best data available is the data that VAC has produced in the Life After Service studies in 2016 and 2019. There's a tremendous overlap between mental health and chronic pain. The challenge often is when veterans have an injury while they're in service, they're likely not going to report it because they're afraid this will impact their career. As Hélène has mentioned, and as most veterans mentioned, I probably assessed almost 600 veterans in the past probably 5 years. And to a person, they will say, I got injured in basic training, but I didn't tell anybody because I did not want to get released. So that's part of the challenge, is that the culture of, I better not disclose it because it could be the end of my career. And sadly, that has happened to a number of them. And so the linkage between chronic pain and mental health, there's clear evidence from VAC's own studies of the overlap. And so you can't split this and treat it separately. You have to treat it in one facility that deals with both.
Thank you, Mr. Garrison. So now let's go for the second round of questions. And I would like to invite our first Vice President of the committee, Mr. Blake Richards, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you to all of our witnesses today for your excellent contributions so far and to come yet, I'm sure. Madame Lascelles, I would like to start for sure with you. First of all, let me say, I know it's been said once or twice already, but it can never be said enough. Thank you for your service. And I am sorry, and it pained me to hear some of the experiences that you endured during your service and during your time in the forces and since. But what I would like to focus on, if I can, is your experience as a veteran. In a previous round of questions, Ms. Wagenthal had asked you a little bit about your transition, right? The day you left and in the very immediate circumstances around your release. I want to take us beyond that, if I can, and I'd like to hear your experiences in the transition into civilian life. You mentioned in your opening remarks, I can't remember the exact quote, but it was something like transition to civilian life is very challenging, particularly for women veterans. And I wanted to hear, if you're willing to share with us a little bit of your personal story as to what you experienced in that transition to civilian life. What were some of the difficulties that you encountered, and what would you see as some of the things that could could be done to improve that experience for someone like yourself who would be released, tomorrow, for example? How could we improve their experience in transition? So let's start there, and I do have a couple other questions for you as well.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for that question.
If I will try to do my best.
Feel free to answer in whichever language is most comfortable to you. That's fine.
I would start with the fact that it's very difficult to just transition from the we mindset as to the I mindset. We've never learned to think about ourselves in the military, and nobody is showing us how to just reconnect with that. So when you're transitioning out and people are asking you, even clinicians, or what do you want to do? What do you like? Or it's something that you cannot answer because you never thought anything for yourself. It's the we mindset. It's the culture and the military mindset that is still sticking in when you're out of the military. It took me, I would say that, like I told you just before, I released in 2016, and I would say that I was finally successful in my transition a year ago. I've been a different program. I've tried many, many, many things. I've tried the program of Sandra Perron. I've tried other organization, and eventually the program that struck with me and finally helped me was exactly about trying to find who I was as a person. It's something that we're not focusing on. Even when we're joining in the military, nobody is telling you that it's going to be an end at some point. For sure, you're going to be out someday. What's your plan B? Do you know yourself enough to transition out of the military and know where to go and do something about your life? So for me, this is one of the main things, trying to transfer from the we mindset to the I mindset.
I can only imagine, especially for someone like yourself. You mentioned you joined at 20 when you were 17 years old. So your entire adult life was in the military. So you would have been in that mindset, and it would be very difficult to make a shift to a different mindset. And that actually leads really well into the next question I wanted to ask you, which was, I know for many veterans that I talk to, I hear often that. It's difficult. There's that sense of purpose when you're in the forces and you leave the forces, and sometimes you feel like that sense of purpose you just can't find it in whatever it is you're doing in your civilian life. And many tell me that volunteering is one of the ways, especially to help their fellow veterans, is one of the ways that they find that purpose. And I understand that you either do volunteer or have volunteered with Wounded Warriors Canada. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that volunteerism, and and the meaning and the purpose you may have found in that, and what that meant to your post-service life.
Thank you for the question again. I guess you just said one word that is very important. We're serving in the military. We're doing things for people, and this is the purpose we've chose when we joined the military, to serve our country, to serve our nation, to serve our people. So doing volunteer work is exactly connecting with that. But at the same time, it's easy to lose yourself to that, to just take care of others and not taking care of yourself. And I did it, I was the first one saying, it's easier to take care of other people because I don't want to take care of myself. So it's a good thing for sure, because it gives you a purpose. And also there's many organizations that you can be there. And I would say that peer support is one thing, but you need to have someone who's successful in this transition to be able to take care of others. You have to be well in your life, well established, I would say, in your transition, to be there to be a good guide for others. So I don't know if it's answering your question,
Yeah, I think so, and I'm getting the signal my time is expired, unfortunately, but I really do want to thank you for sharing with us your experiences.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Richards. And now let's go to Mrs. Richie Valdez for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses for joining us today and to recognize those of you who have served this great country. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll direct my questions to Dr. Henson. In your clinical practice, what specific mental health challenges are more prevalent among women veterans compared to their male counterparts? So you haven't mentioned yet in your opening. You listed some, but if there was some that you didn't mention already, could you just cover that?
I find a lot of the women that come to my practice have been diagnosed with comorbid disorders, and so often when men are presenting, they have PTSD as their primary concern with. And a lot of the women that I end up working with have been diagnosed with personality disorders or more sort of serious level of disorders, because it's almost like when they came forward with concerns, when they were having difficulties, they became the issue instead of the system. And so they ended up in non-culturally competent care at times where they became the problem that needed to leave the military in order, instead of, addressing the military concerns to help them. So that's probably the most predominant thing is I've had, I think, only one gentleman who has come to me that has been diagnosed in the military and several women.
Thank you. We've heard several testimonies where women veterans have experienced military sexual trauma and several other traumas, and you've listed those also in your opening. With your expertise, what impact has that had on their mental well-being in their transition and in their life?
One of the things that I find is because of the soldier-on mentality, it's sort of the belief that when they've experienced systemic micro sort of sexualized traumas, they're stuffing it down and losing their identity as to who they are as women, how they identify, and sort of in order to exist in this culture, having to be okay with how things go. And you can only stuff for so many years. And then it sort of manifests into, as we're hearing, a lot of chronic pain issues, family struggles, and then not feeling supported on the family end as well. And so it just sort of becomes an explosive situation for them in all domains of their lives.
In recommendations that you listed, you mentioned that what we've heard before in this committee, which is the importance of having education and experience to be able to service our veterans with the type of care that they need and deserve. Can you describe what the interactions are like with veterans at your clinic, which uses your approach?
I often work from an approach of acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the pieces of, or I should say a lot of the pieces of that practice is firstly helping someone to identify their emotions, understand and identify their physiological challenges, understand their nervous system responses. And the following stages is around how to start to look at what do you value, what is your purpose, what is your meaning. And as we've heard from our other presenters today, when you leave the military, they're sort of lacking in direction. Even some of their transferable skills, they don't understand how they fit into a civilian context. And so understanding who you are as an individual, as a civilian, becomes quite a challenge. And one of the pieces as well, because I work up in Renfrew County, is that there's a lot of isolation, and PTSD becomes a very isolated disorder. And when you've had systems that have created more sort of sanctuary trauma, it's very easy to get lost in a rural place, and it takes a long time to really seek out that help. So as I said before, I'm spending often a lot of time helping with those pieces before we can even do the trauma-informed or the trauma-specific therapies.
Thank you. Mrs. Jacquemet, what are some common barriers or stigmas that you have observed women veterans face when they're trying to seek mental health support?
Thank you for the question. Yeah. So some of the barriers that they face, there's oftentimes shame associated. There's a lot of feelings, and so there's some of that is that self-stigma that they have. There's also some psychosocial issues, or difficulty just navigating a system that's a difficulty for people in coming forward with to seek help. Do you have any additional?
I think one of the other challenges, although Veterans Affairs does provide some child care services, a lot of the women veterans I work with have small children. And so they're trying to balance how to go to all of these different places and all of their different treatment modalities while having small children at home. And especially if they're a single parent, it's quite difficult to navigate all of those pieces. So it sort of becomes, do I support my children and focus on them, or do I focus on myself? And most of the time, being a mom is going to outweigh the system.
Thank you, and I think I'm up for my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Valdez. So now we're going to have two short interventions of 2 minutes and a half. So j'invite donc Monsieur Luc.
I will now go to Luc Desilets for 2.5 minutes, please. You have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Ms. Le Celler. The center has set up an advisory committee to guide research efforts, and I've looked online. I see that there are 2 women among 10 or 12 men. I think there are only a couple of veterans. Yes, you're quite right. However, there are already efforts underway to seek out more women and more representation from other parts of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Air Force, and the Navy, for example. I'm glad to hear that, because we know that 40% of men and 50% of women veterans have these needs, and so it would be very relevant to have more women. I would like you to give me a couple of recommendations that you would like us to include in our report. Thank you for that question. As was mentioned, we need an increasing focus on the connection between chronic pain and psychological pain. That's one. And I think, second, we also need to look at something that was mentioned by other witnesses, that the fact that women have a tendency to care for others and not for themselves. So how can we help women where they are? I, for example, wanted to perform at a very high level, just like the men, and put up with abuse in order to move forward. So we need to be respected for who we are. I would mention as well that in Quebec, we are still seeing the generic term in French, and we need to use the term that has been agreed on so that women have more visibility as members of the armed forces and veterans. Thank you. I'm out of time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Desilets. And now, Mr. Garrison.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, although, of course, that's not enough. I want to go back to something that Ms. Henson said, which I found very striking, and I'm going to ask you a question that we have heard from serving women and veterans, that there's a failure. If your image of who is a soldier is a cisgendered, straight, white guy, and you don't acknowledge that women's health needs are different, then that will lead to misdiagnosis or overdiagnosis of problems that women veterans face. Is that something that you see?
Definitely. There's a very clear line between women presenting sort of with personality concerns, depression, anxiety, and then PTSD, where the men, when they come in, the PTSD sort of drives the bus sort of piece. And then a lot of the chronic pain, I know a lot of the women that I work with, and gentlemen as well, but more so the women, their challenges that they're having on a physiological level, there seems to be more difficulties in getting approvals and getting the treatments that they need more long-standing. They seem to get a lot more things coming back where they need to apply again and again.
Very quickly, back to the Chronic Pain Center on the same question of visibility of the less well-represented parts of the military and veterans community. I know this committee has heard some testimony that the Chronic Pain Center has done better in paying attention to women's health needs, racialized, indigenous. Can you tell us something about what it is in your approach that has gotten you more success in dealing with the less visible parts of the community that serves?
Maybe I can start, and I think there's a couple of important things the center has done. One, it has funded studies specifically about sex and gender and how they affect chronic pain. So that's been an important thing. Two, in the evidence synthesis that we've done, we've mandated that sex and gender be considered in when we look at the literature. Sadly, one of the first studies we did was to try to look at whether there were different outcomes for multidisciplinary pain treatment for men and women veterans, and we found that none of the studies had actually separated the data for the men and the women, so we don't know. Because researchers haven't been reporting that. And as we go forward, that's one of the things that we're mandating, is that researchers always report their data for the men and the women separately, so that we can tell if there's different treatment outcomes for different sexes and genders. And then the third thing that the center does is very active engagement of people with lived experience in all of the research projects. So, for example, on the project that I talked to you about, there is a co-author on that paper who is a woman veteran who has a lived experience of sexual assault that was very engaged in the project at every stage of the project. So we're getting, as you see, the valuable experience is that people have to share. It's important that that be part of the research process. So those are the things I've noticed. I'll ask Dr. Ramesh again, because he can speak from a center perspective, but my experiences as a researcher, that's what I've seen.
Yeah. Dr. Zacharias, really quick, please, because time is over.
Two things real quick. One was we insist on veteran partners with all the researchers in every project, because they need that perspective of the veteran. And finally, the last comment I would make, Mr. Chairman, is that pain is never just the problem with the individual. It's a family problem. So if it's a female veteran, it will affect their partner, and it will affect their children. So we have been funding a project looking at the impact of chronic pain on the children of veterans suffering from chronic pain. And that should be coming out later this year.
Thank you very much. And now let's go to Mr. Stephen Ellis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Just by way of being absolutely transparent, I served in the military for 9 years, but I got out a long time ago. And I also had I'm a physician, so I had a chronic pain clinic. So my worlds are crashing together here in a very strange way this evening. To Madame Salur, if I could, we talked about transition to civilian life, and somebody on the team, and I'm not sure what the focus of your research is, are you working on any topic around resilience?
Merci pour la question. I'm focusing on the identity crisis that military personnel are going through while transitioning out of the military based on a personal stress injury.
Okay, thank you for that. So maybe I'll focus on that. You know, the interesting part of it, of course, is, as I was talking to one of my colleagues, you know, when you're in the military, you belong to a club. And then the next day, you're out of the club. And I would imagine that for female veterans, it's perhaps somewhat more difficult, because I suspect, because I'm not a female veteran, but my question is, are there times when you were really a part of the club and other times where you felt like you were looking into the club?
That's a good question. Thank you. I would say that I had to prove that I was reliable as being part of the men's group. And from the beginning, I pushed myself, to the limit that I got told that I was part of the club. But for sure, in some portion of my career, when I was, going up the ranks and changing position, it was always I had to prove myself again and making sure that everybody had my back instead of stabbing me in the back. So it was not an easy journey, and it's something that I think it's every woman who's in the service who's experiencing that.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, to Madame Salur, if I could. Of course, then it doesn't matter where you're posted after you leave the military. You're never a part of that club. And is that part of the difficulty with the transition, is that civilians in general just really do not understand, what it is you have experienced and then are experienced in a very unusual way when you are, of course, transitioning out of the military?
Well, I guess it's part of also of being recognized as a veteran. As a female, often people don't believe me that I'm a veteran, that I went to Afghanistan and I was on the terrain over there. I exploded on an IED, and people are looking at me like if I was lying or, telling the story of somebody else. So I guess it's the main thing, being recognized in our own experience. That is the difficulty.
Thank you very much. And through you, Chair, I think it was Dr. Zacharias who talked a little bit about resilience. And if I don't have that right, then it must have been Dr. McDermott. But that being said, is there any way to teach resilience? And is that something that we need to be looking at in perhaps in terms of recruitment of military members or teaching kids in school, things like that? Are you doing any work on that?
I think you've touched on what is an extremely important aspect of transition. We had a Canadian Pain Society had a meeting last week where myself and Dr. Anne-Hélène Siller, another veteran, talked about resilience and transition. And one of the things we've found out is the similarity between professional athletes and veterans is incredibly unique. They are all mission first, and then their career ends. And when it ends, the applause stops, and they're left on their own. So we've been working with trying to increase awareness of the role of the Canadian Armed Forces, of veterans. And I believe if we can somehow change the gestalt of the Canadian public to understand that whenever there's a crisis in this country, whether it's the ice storms in Quebec or the hurricanes in the East Coast, or currently in Alberta with the fires, or with COVID, the Canadian military are the first ones who run in. And we need to respect their service. But at some point in time, their careers are over, just like the athletes' careers are over. So we're looking at creating an ability to be able to create resilience in both these groups so they could learn from each other. So I think over the next few years, awareness will increase for the Canadian population. We'd like to get into the schools to make sure that people understand they live in an incredibly amazing country, due in part to the service, and we want to respect that.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. And now let's go to MP Charles Rogers. He's on Zoom. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Rogers. Your mic. Okay, great.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all of our witnesses this evening. I had many questions, but many have been answered by the witnesses in response to questions from our colleagues around the table. I think one thing is clear, that, based on all the testimony we've heard this evening, is that when people leave the military, it's clear that the military doesn't always leave them, for sure. So, Dr. Ensign, I want to ask you this question. Why is it sometimes so difficult for a veteran of 25 or 30 years who have had successful careers in some cases, military careers, why is it so difficult for them to transition to civilian life and to maintain a strong family relationship with their spouse or children and so on? Is it because they miss the disciplined military lifestyle and maybe feel abandoned or all alone to a certain extent? Could you comment on that for me, please?
Thank you for the question. I think that it's multifaceted, but I do believe for a lot of individuals, they've missed a lot of family time with their service. And so sometimes it's about how do I fit back into this unit? And for families at home, they've been doing things for a long time in one way and sort of flexing and waxing and waning as this person comes in to sort of support them and be present with them. But then at the end of it all, after years of service, how do you fully reintegrate? And how do you become a fully family person again, someone who's a part of that unit? And for some individuals, especially if you've had a very long career, your children have now grown up and moved on, and they're, developing their own families. And so not only are you trying to find your own personal identity, but you're also trying to figure out, what is my family identity? What is my community identity? And how do I fit back into this overall system? I don't know if you have anything to add, Alana.
I just want to add that, people who suffer from trauma, it's a very isolating experience, and often there's a lot of disconnection that happens from community, from social, environments, from family, and actually from themselves. And so, reintegrating and reconnecting can be really difficult. So there's that, functional disconnection that happens maybe while serving, but reconnecting is often a really difficult thing. I just wanted to add that.
So, Ms. Jack Mitt, this committee has been really focused on the transition piece, and we're looking for some great advice which we're getting from this witness panel. So, if you could provide some recommendations for us for this study, what would they be? And I would encourage you as well, as I said to some of the others, to think about the study that we are going to be preparing and submitting any future written recommendations that you would, what you might think about.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to actually defer to my colleague on this.
Okay.
I believe one of the really important pieces is to really think about how do we develop research with and in collaboration with the community. And I think that the center that we're meeting with this evening in chronic pain is doing a really great job of having veterans working in collaboration. But we're really looking at one of the recommendations that we have is around community-based participatory research, which looks at individuals who feel marginalized within communities and starting with them and in collaboration developing what are the research questions? How do we access those individuals who are maybe feeling a little bit disconnected overall? And then how do we build that sort of peer mentorship to include more and more voices in this process? So a top-down approach that's coming from even sometimes researchers, and I'm a researcher myself, but coming from that sort of external place and then moving inwards, we're constantly missing the mark. So starting here and then moving outwards in collaboration, I think, is the ideal approach.
Sorry, Chair.
15 seconds.
Okay. I guess Dr. McDermott, in previous meetings, female veterans have testified that mental health challenges create physical health problems and vice versa. as a result of the time in the service. Can you speak to these types of occurrences, maybe some examples, and the connection between the mind and the body, of course, in general?
Again, please, quickly, in about 30 seconds, if you can answer that question.
There are so many ways. I'll just give an example of sleep. If you think about it, physical pain interrupts your sleep, and psychological distress interrupts your sleep. And when you don't sleep, you have more physical pain, and you can't function. So everything is connected. We see people, sometimes self-medicating. So addictions can be related to untreated physical or mental health problems. So we see all these complex interactions between every aspect of physical health and every aspect of mental health, and that's as brief as I can make it, really.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. McDermott. And now let's go to a final round of questions. But we're gonna have 4 interventions. We're gonna stop after Mr. Garrison, and I start for 5 minutes, Mr. Blake Richards.
Thank you. Miss Jacques-May, is that? Yeah. Wanted to ask you a little bit about the new rehab contract. And I wanted to just hear your thoughts on the impact that's having on both service providers and on veterans, and whether you feel Veterans Affairs communicated properly with service providers and with veterans about the implementation of that contract. And if you yourself will be continue to be a service provider under that new contract. It's a lot of questions all in one, but I'll let you address that however you choose.
Yeah. So the there wasn't a lot of information about the change, and as for myself, I learned about it as it was happening, and I didn't really have a lot of information about it, and those that I spoke to who were involved also didn't have a lot of information about it. So that was really difficult to help when clients were asking questions, because I didn't also have the answers, and I also didn't know who to direct them to. So that was really challenging. And when things are when there's a lot of unknowns, it puts people on edge, and when creates more anxiety. And what helps anxiety is when we have things that are reliable, when we know what to expect. So it was really challenging. Some of our sessions, were just about what's going to happen. Am I losing you as a provider? Those type of things. So there's still not a lot of information. I don't know who to contact, when it comes to my clients who've been called by PCVRS. They don't remember the name of the person. They just remember they spoke to somebody for 3 hours and had to tell their story again, but they couldn't remember the name of the person and didn't have a phone number. So that I hear that story often. As for me, I will not likely be signing on with PCVRS, and at the same time, we're hearing that we can continue with our clients, continue providing therapy to them. However, getting sessions approved is a big unknown. So I'm getting, phone calls saying, okay, we got to do this quick because we don't know what's going to happen. Try to get, send in for more approvals for sessions because we're not sure how you're going to get more approvals. So, so that leaves a lot of unanswered questions.
Sure sounds like it. We're working on, we finished a study on that, and we are working on a report, I guess, for it. So it's good information for us to have for that, so thank you. I'm going to just interrupt right now to move a motion that the committee order the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide any results, findings, conclusions, and recommendations related to the sex and gender-based analysis of disability benefits adjudication research conducted by Dr. Barbara Clow. And I do, having moved it, it was on notice, so it's okay to move. But I just want to apologize. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I do apologize to our witnesses. I just hope you all understand. We get two-hour meetings each week, and if we want to do something like this, this is the only way we can do it. So I do apologize, but it's an important part of what we're trying to do with this study, and so I am moving that motion, and I'm just going to move it. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I know there's others that do have something they want to say about it, so I'm going to just move the motion, and I'll yield the floor.
So the motion has been moved, but would you like to explain it a little bit? Because I think that members, we don't
Mr.
have
Chair,
any copy yet.
I think I'm pretty self-explanatory. It's pretty self-explanatory. There was, it's been brought up a number of times by witnesses in the committee that there is this research out there, that Veterans Affairs has been reluctant or not willing or whatever the case might be to release, and I know there's witnesses that expressed that it would be useful. I don't think there's much more explanation needed than that, so.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if this motion was put on notice, I haven't seen it. I would appreciate the opportunity to suspend so that we can at least have a huddle. I had no idea this was coming. I think we had a meeting not too long ago where we had committee business and there were no witnesses to present it in front of, but I think I'd like the opportunity to suspend, because if it has been put on notice, I've never seen it.
I don't really see a reason to do that, Mr. Chair. It was put on notice. It's been on notice for some time. If members chose to ignore it, that's not the rest of the committee's fault. We don't have a lot of time left here. I don't think there's a need to suspend.
It was on notice on April 21st, so that's why, but you're going to receive a copy, a new copy, so you can look at it. But like Mr. Richard said, I have to say to the witnesses, you can stay with us, but it's in our procedure. I have to deal with that motion with members of the committee before I go on. I'd like to know if there is any intervention. Mr. Garrison.
Thank you. Just to make things even more complicated, I'd like to move an amendment to Mr. Richard's motion, which I think is being circulated electronically as we speak. And that would be just to add at the end things to make it more easy for VAC to identify what we actually need in the committee. And so the amendment would say as follows: the description of disability adjudication at VAC, on a report from the 13th September 2019, findings from key informant consultations from the 1st of October 2019, analysis of adjudication instruments and processes from the 20th of December 2019, the evolution of adjudication tools and rules at VAC, 20th of December 2019, and finally, sex and gender-based analysis of disability benefits adjudication at VAC, summary report, 11th of February 2020. So, with respect, Mr. Chair, this doesn't change anything about the sense. It just allows the committee to give more definite instructions to VAC about what reports it's looking for.
And excuse me, Mr. Garrison, you said that we have a copy circulated, no?
Circulated electronically, I think.
Electronic, okay, so the clerk is working on it. But could you, at the time, repeat it again for the benefit of the members, please? By the time we receive it electronically.
It would add simply after Barbara Clow as follows. 1, description of disability adjudication at VAC from the September 13th, 2019. 2, findings from key informant consultations, the 1st of October 2019. 3, analysis of adjudication instruments and processes, 20th December 2019. 4, the evolution of adjudication tools and rules at VAC, 20th December 2019. And lastly, 5, sex and gender-based analysis of disability benefits adjudication at VAC, summary report, 11th of February 2020.
Okay, so we can take care of this amendment. Would you like to intervene? Oh, I have on the Zoom Mr. Rogers and following by Mrs. Latenzio. Go ahead, Mr. Rogers.
Chair, I just received a copy of Mr. Richards' motion, but I haven't seen the amended motion. And I would like an opportunity to discuss with my colleagues, and so I move we suspend.
Well, Mr. Rogers, the personally, I received the amendment of Mr. Garrison on my email, and but maybe that we can go to Mrs. Latenzio and coming back to deal with that.
If I can just speak to his point of order there.
Thank you, Mr.
I mean,
Chair.
it has been given to all members of the committee. It is in your email box. I don't see a reason to suspend.
Okay. Mrs. Latenzio, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be able to receive a copy for myself. I have yet to receive it on my email, the amendments from Mr. Garrison. So if the clerk can ensure that I receive a copy so I can follow.
I know that, Mrs. Latenzio, you're not a regular member of the committee, but I'd like to make sure with the clerk that you receive a copy as soon as possible. He just sent
I did get the notice from the clerk.
Okay, we will send it to you as soon as possible. Any other intervention on the amendment? Est-ce que vous n'avez pas d'intervention?
Does anyone else have a comment? Any discussion? Waiting now for Ms. Latenzio to receive the amendment from Mr. Garrison, but if there are any other comments, this would be the time to make them. So the amendment was sent to Ms. Latenzio. If there is no other discussion, we will vote on the amendment proposed by Mr. Garrison.
The opportunity to discuss amongst ourselves the very detailed amendment that's just been provided. Mr. Rogers asked that you suspend to afford us that opportunity, and you have the discretion to do so. I would ask that you exercise it.
To that point, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
To that point, I mean, as you indicated previously, this motion was submitted almost a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
All that the amendment does is simply list the research that's been referred to in this motion. If members didn't do their homework in a month that they've had to do it, I don't believe the rest of the committee should be required to sit around while there's a discussion. I don't think the witnesses should be interrupted any longer than they need to be. Let's just vote on this, and if members didn't do their homework, they'll have to choose what they want to do in their vote.
Okay. Okay, colleagues, let's go back. And on the floor, I have that request saying that to suspend, but I have to have the full consentment of the committee to suspend. Do I have the consentment of the committee to suspend? No. I don't have the consentment of the committee to suspend. But the same...
I'd like to speak to the motion and the amendment. When do you expect to adjourn the meeting? Because I'll be speaking until you do.
Mr. Casey, could you please repeat?
Yeah. I'd like to speak to the motion. Will we be adjourning at 8:30?
Yeah.
Very well. Thank you very much for the floor, Mr. Chair. We have before us, in the dying moments of the meeting in front of witnesses, a motion that was apparently put on notice. It's confirmed now that it was put on notice on April 21st. On its face, I don't see a problem with the motion. It certainly appears that there was some research done by a Dr. Barbara Clow on a matter that does appear to be relevant.
Mr. Casey, yes. I'm sorry, because of the time, I have to stop you
I have
right
a lot
here.
more to say, Mr. Chair.
I know, but I have to make sure that we respect the clock. So we're gonna adjourn for sure. But first of all, members of the committee, we have witnesses with us. Please allow me to say thank you to them, because for the input in our study, it was really important to see you, to listen to you tonight. And as an individual, ou bien let's go right now en français, je voudrais remercier.
I would like to thank all of the staff and our witnesses, Dr. Alicia Henson, clinical psychologist, supervised practice, Alana Jacquemet, registered social worker and registered psychotherapist, and from the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence for Canadian Veterans, Dr. Ramesh Zacharias, Chief Executive Officer, Hélène Leseller, Captain Retired, Co-Chair, Center of Excellence Advisory Council for Veterans, and Dr. Joy McDermott, Professor. And is it the pleasure of the committee now to adjourn the meeting? The meeting is adjourned.